ظهرت قوات الاعداء. حول. مستحيل. غير ممكن. مستحيل. تحركات للاعداء، هل تسمعوني؟ وحدات الاعداء تتحرك. قوات الاعداء. حول. تعزيزاتنا على وجه الثبات. شوهد قناص من قوات الاعداء. شوهد قناص من الاعداء. فقدنا السيطرة على احدى النقاط. شكرا لك. الموقع تحت السيطرة. انتهى. شكرا ايها البطل. حول. احضروا المسلم. ظهرت قوات الاعداء. حول في المنطقة. اين المسلم؟
بدون سيار تعمل. بدأ
شوهد قناص من الاعداء. جنود الاعداء. المنطقة. شوهد قناص من الاعداء. شوهد ظهر جنود. شوهد قناص من الاعداء. هل تسمعوني؟ احضروا المساعدة احد الرجال. فقد احد الرجال. تم الاستيلاء على وهي تحت قناص قوات الاعداء. حول. اين المسعف؟ ظهر جنود الاعداء. ظهر جنود.
شارك بث الحي من
احضروا المساعدة احد الرجال. احد الرجال. النقاط. احضروا المسلم. ظهر جنود الاعداء.
تذكارة بدون سيار تعمل. بدأت البث.
شوهدت قوات الاعداء. قوات الاعداء. Enemy forces spotted. Hostile infantry spotted. Over. Enemy troops identified. Do you copy? Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Hostile forces. Over. Medic. Enemy units on the move. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Enemy units. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy units on the move. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
UAV transmitting on this.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. All clear. Position under control. Out. Enemy forces spotted. 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 Enemy infantry spotted.
UAV transmitting on this time.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy troops. sniper spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units on the move. Enemy units on the move. Sniper.
Enemy sniper spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy infantry, enemy sniper.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy traffic. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy troops identified. Do you copy?
Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units on the move.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry 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 spotted.
UAV online.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units on the move. Hostiles on the ground.
سقط أحد الرجال.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Frag grenade.
Enemy spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy activity. Do you copy?
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Hostiles on the
Enemy
ground.
infantry spotted.
Do you copy?
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy activity. Do you copy?
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units on
Enemy
the move.
infantry spotted.
Enemy reinforcing. You copy?
Online and transmitting.
Hostile force.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces. Enemy forces. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy unit. Enemy activity. Do you copy? Reinforcing activity. Do you copy? Enemy units on the move. Enemy units on the move. Enemy units on the move.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy troops identified. Do you copy?
Enemy forces spotted.
We need reinforcements. Do you copy? Infantry spotted. Over.
Enemy infantry
Hostile
spotted.
infantry
Enemy
spotted.
infantry spotted.
Enemy troops reinforcing. Forces spotted. Over.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Medic. Hostile infantry spotted. Over.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Position under base.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
أحد الرجال.
Enemy spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry 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 spotted.
Hostiles on the ground.
Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy troops identified. Do you copy?
On this mark.
Enemy infantry spotted.
Medic.
Being overrun.
Enemy infantry spotted.
أحضروا المسعف.
Hostile forces spotted. Over.
Enemy infantry
Enemy
spotted.
forces. Over.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
UAV transmitting on
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Infantry spotted.
Enemy
Spotted. Spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Hostile infantry spotted. Over.
Enemy spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces. Enemy forces. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Hostile infantry spotted. Over.
online and transmitting.
Enemy sniper spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Cleared and under.
Enemy forces.
Enemy troops identified. Do you copy? Enemy
Infantry. Enemy infantry.
Enemy troops. Running enemy forces. Over.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Spotted.
Get first aid.
Enemy reinforces. Over. Enemy forces. Over. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Do you copy? Running dry.
Enemy infantry spotted.
Hostile forces spotted. Over. Enemy units on the move. On the ground. Enemy troops.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy units on the move.
Enemy
Enemy troops identified.
Enemy spotted. Spotted.
Online and transmitting.
You got it.
Enemy forces. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy forces. Enemy forces.
Enemy spotted.
Hostile forces spotted. Over. Hostile forces spotted. Enemy forces. Over. Hostile forces spotted. Okay. You got it. Thanks. I owe you one. Enemy troops. Enemy
All
troops.
clear. Position under control. Out.
UAV
Hostile
transmitting.
forces spotted. Over.
Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units.
Enemy
Over.
infantry spotted.
Enemy troops.
Enemy infantry spotted. Spotted. Enemy
Hostile
infantry
sniper
spotted.
spotted. Over. Hostile infantry spotted. Over. Enemy troops identified. Do you copy? Hostile
Enemy infantry.
Enemy activity. Enemy units on the
Clear.
move. Those on the ground. Thanks, champ.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
How about some help over here?
Enemy spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy activity.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units on the move. Enemy units on the move.
الإسعافات الأولية إلى هنا.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry forces spotted. Enemy sniper spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy activity. Do you copy?
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy units on the move. Enemy troops.
Enemy infantry spotted.
Hostile sniper spotted. Over.
UAV transmitting on visual.
Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy units.
Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy units on the move.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy activity. Do you copy? Enemy units on the move.
أحضروا
forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy units, you got it. Ground.
Enemy forces spotted. Sniper spotted.
Enemy activity. Do you copy?
Enemy sniper. Enemy infantry.
Enemy activity. Do you copy?
Enemy infantry. Enemy
forces
forces
spotted.
ammunition. Over. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy sniper spotted. Enemy forces. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Cleared and under control.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. I owe you one.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy.
Medic. Enemy troops identified. Do you copy? Enemy
move.
activity. Do you copy?
You are the
Enemy
worst.
units on the move.
First aid! Here! Here!
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Medic!
Enemy infantry spotted. Spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Hostile sniper spotted. Over.
Transmitting on this
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Enemy activity. Do you copy? Force spotted. Over. Enemy units on the
We've
enemy
lost
activity.
control
Do
of an
you copy?
outpost. Enemy infantry
Enemy
spotted.
troop.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy forces spotted.
Enemy forces. Over.
UAV online and transmitting.
Enemy forces spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Medic.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted.
Hostiles on the ground. Enemy units on the move. Medic. Hostiles on the ground. Medic.
Clear!
Hey,
Clear!
hostiles on the ground. I owe you one.
هيا انطلق!
Medic.
We've lost control of an outpost.
Hostile infantry spotted. Over. Thanks, Jim. Thanks. I owe you one.
تعيش شوية.
Enemy forces. Over.
أحضر الإسعافات الأولية إلى هنا.
Hostile sniper spotted. Over.
Get back! Get first aid! Here! Get first aid! Here! Get ammo! Here!
Medic.
All clear. Position under control.
Enemy units on the move. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Enemy units on the move. Medic.
Ammo! Here!
Enemy units on the move.
Affirmative. Negative.
Follow me. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Snipers on our perimeter. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Follow me. Hey, thanks. Snipers on our perimeter. Enemy troop. Sniper.
UAV transmitting on this mark.
Sorry.
My grand.
Enemy units on the move.
Next time, try following my orders.
Good deal, thanks. Enemy units on the move. Enemy activity. Do you copy? Attack this position.
Online and transmitting.
Follow me, soldiers! Follow me, soldiers! Enemy troops! You got it. Follow me, soldiers! Enemy troops identified. Do you copy? Hostile forces spotted. Over. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Requesting UAV over. Unmanned area. Unmanned area. Requesting UAV. Unmanned.
Negative. UAV already
Negative. Medic.
Negative. UAV already
Medic. Medic.
Transmitting on this mark.
Sniper. Sniper spotted. Over. Requesting UAV. Requesting unmanned area. Enemy troops identified. Requesting unmanned area.
UAV already airborne.
Medic.
Request denied.
Thanks. I owe you one. Enemy protection line over. Medic. Enemy forces over. Enemy forces over. Hostile forces spotted. Over. Enemy unit. Enemy infantry spotted. You are the worst squad I've ever had. Copy.
Transmitting on this mark.
Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. You got the units on the move. Enemy troop.
UAV is no on fuel. Transmission ending.
Hostile forces spotted. Over. Enemy units on the move.
UAV online and transmitting.
Enemy units on the move. Enemy units on the move. Do you copy? Enemy troop. Enemy infantry spotted. Hostiles on the ground. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy units spotted. Over. Enemy infantry spotted. Enemy infantry spotted. Medic. Enemy infantry spotted. 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 Enemy forces spotted. Enemy spotted.